Made it. Finally, you've got your on-site interview. And this one is going to be by far the hardest one out of all of them. And it's also probably going to vary the most between different companies. Facebook has 3 different interviews: leadership, product, and execution. Microsoft has 5 one-hour interviews that are going to be a combination of behavioral, product, and technical. And then one of those is going to be a lunch interview. And then all of the companies have very different things. Intuit only had one interview that lasted an hour and a half, but you got interviewed by 2 people about a case. So all of your interviews are really going to vary a lot. So what you want to make sure is that coming into your on-site interview that you're as prepared as possible, and you're most likely going to have a pretty good idea of what's going to be expected, but you should be starting to prepare as soon as you finish your second round, because if you wait until you get offered the on-site interview, you're only going to have a week of turnaround. So you should really start preparing as soon as you get the opportunity to, once you conclude your second round of interviews. So one thing you should really be aware of with your on-site interview is how nerve-wracking it can be just interviewing in a new environment. There's a lot of great candidates, myself, who blow their interviews just because they get too nervous because they're interviewing in an unfamiliar environment. So while at school, at least, I don't know about you guys, but for me, I practice in the same room all the time. Really try getting used to doing mock interviews in different places so you can get used to that feeling. Because when you walk into that interview room at the company, it's going to be completely new and you're not going to be familiar with it, and it might throw you off. But one of the reasons these interviews are so hard is because they're really looking at everything. How well you answer the questions, how your past experience, how well you speak, and are you a cultural fit? Now, don't underestimate the cultural fit portion. Companies would much rather take a candidate that doesn't score as well in an interview, but does really well on cultural fit versus someone who kills the interview, but doesn't really fit culturally. So don't underestimate that. And showing your willingness to want to be there can also really help as well. So this is, I've said this again, but your number one tip for preparing for this interview is just going to be practice. If you start fumbling on a question or mess up because you get nervous in the interview, it's going to be incredibly hard to recover and do well. So the more you practice various different types of questions on hardware products, software products, and all the different type and past questions you can find, the more prepared you'll feel and the more confident you're going to feel, so the better you're going to do. So practice. In my case for Intuit, there was 1,200 applicants and they took 3. But going to my on-site, I knew I was going to get my interview. And one of the reasons why is because the on-site interview was just a case. There was no random questions. The whole interview focused on just one case they gave you ahead of time, and they asked you to spend a few hours on it. Well, I spent an entire week on it. I had multiple friends help me with it. And I was bringing in concepts from my personal business and all my internships that I knew other candidates were not going to think of, and mine was going to be extremely unique, and I knew I had the relevant experience they wanted, and I got along great with my interviewers the round before. So I knew I was going to get it. And this sounds arrogant, but I was just very confident. I had already got my Microsoft offer, so I wasn't really worried if I didn't get it. So I wasn't that super nervous. So ultimately, that confidence really showed, and I ended up getting it. And one of the reasons I think I did is because I felt like I was going to. And that comes with practice, that feeling. So really just practice as much as you possibly can. So really my 2 big tips for your on-site interview are 1, practicing in different rooms and locations, and then 2, practicing as much as possible to build up your confidence. And ultimately, your on-site is going to show the research you've done, the practice you've put forward, and how much you really want it. And another thing I would recommend is try to do an on-site with a company you care the least about first. I've said this before, but just because on-sites are really hard. They're just nerve-wracking going to a place, and I think a lot of people struggle with their first one. Nearly every person I talked to that interviewed for PM struggled with their first on-site because it's just such a big hurdle to overcome your first time. But the second time, you kind of know what more to expect. You're used to it. You've flown out before. You get up early, and so you're just used to it. This is your second time doing it. So try and schedule one ahead of time. And good luck, because your on-site is so important.